I just came across something that I feel like is really, really important to share that deals with victims of SA and their perpetrators and how they get away with doing the things that they do. So whether you are maybe a victim of SA, as I am, what I want to get into is honestly really healing. It can be really triggering, whether somebody that you love has been a victim or you just want to better understand how perpetrators do the things that they do. Please stick around, because if I have one video I ever make, I hope that the most people will watch this one. So the context first deals with Tim Ballard. Now, Tim is best known as being the real-life hero behind the Sound of Freedom movie and making it his life's mission to save women and children who have been sexually exploited and taking them out of the hell of sex slavery. A very noble cause, you would imagine, right? In the last year, about 8 women, I think, at this point, have filed a civil suit against Tim Ballard and Operation Underground Railroad, alleging that Tim Ballard, in his pursuit to go into these sex parlors and these clubs and these strip clubs to rescue children, that he would tell them that the only way to actually do it is to practice sexual acts with him, to develop their chemistry so that the sex traffickers would actually believe that they were a real kinky couple. And so a pattern has emerged of how Tim Ballard grooms and manipulates spiritually and otherwise these women, holding on this pedestal of what would you do to save the kids, and getting them to role play different acts with him, whether before they're on an operation or during it. And so while I have been covering this story with Tim Ballard for over a year now, it doesn't matter what you know about Tim Ballard, whether you think he's innocent or guilty, to listen and understand what I want to share next. So when I took to my Instagram today, I wanted to ask anyone who feels comfortable sharing, have you ever been sexually assaulted and tried to make the person feel better about what they did to you before you were able to process how they groomed you into a non-consensual experience? And the messages that I got are why I'm making this video. One person wrote into me, I don't know how to put this into words, but I was date raped at 21 and it took me until I was 28 to even realize it. I kept the relationship with the guy for a month after the event, trying to be anything he needed to make what happened worth it to me. 100%, I tried to act normal and brush it off. I would say anything like, oh yeah, no big deal, it's all good, when it was very not good, when I felt horrible and sick and scared, but I've been conditioned to appease men, especially male leaders. Another one, I was abused by my dad. He used to tell me he loved me. I thought if I hated it, it was my fault. I think that's how we all want to feel, because seeing them as a monster is terrifying. Amy Morgan Davis was Miss Utah 2004. And she is one of the women who has joined her name in this civil suit to make these allegations against Tim Ballard of sexual assault that occurred in October of 2021 at a training operation and a role play that Tim Ballard coaxed her into in a hotel room as being a potential couples ruse partner, potential operative on one of his missions. And recently, thankfully, Mike Baker, a very respected journalist from the New York Times, did an intense investigative piece about this entire story, flew out to Utah, interviewed my friends, a lot of the women, and that made Tim Ballard extra angry, where he's already smeared many of his victims. But in this case, things get a little bit different, and I want to explain why. Because now that this is in the New York Times, that has made him very angry, and he has filed a defamation suit against Miss Utah. So whether this video is just for Tim Ballard, the president of Anti-Sex Crimes Incorporated, to give him an education, but anyone else who wants to listen about the psychology behind how victims of sex assault actually act in real life. I wouldn't think I would need to educate somebody who it's their entire job to understand how victims of sex trafficking and sex assault act post criminal encounter. But I think it's important to hear Tim Ballard's defense, if you want to call it that, his argument that not only did he not sexually assault Amy Morgan Davis in a hotel room as part of a training operation where he needed her to take off her clothes to save the kids, he also was alleging that she was the one who came onto him and she is the one who sexually assaulted him. So not only has Tim Ballard become this savior-like figure within Mormon and evangelical and different right-wing circles as this hero to be worshipped for the work that he does, saving sex-trafficked kids, and then manipulating and grooming women into thinking that he could not possibly be a monster to do anything wrong, and that his tactics to save the kids are always the correct tactics, and that he's the expert and you're not. And so when women finally collectively came together and said, what happened to me was not okay, very, very bravely, might I add. So while I think that the evidence that Tim Ballard is nothing like the hero that he claims to be, and he's quite the opposite, and the corroborating evidence, the forensic evidence, I mean, the DNA, his semen is on the skirt of one of his couples or his partners, Celeste Boris, his executive assistant. So while I think that the evidence is overwhelming that he is a rapist and a fraud, so whether or not you know who Tim Ballard is, he's posting these smears and these cherry-picked texts of what she has said to him after this assault occurred. And to the point that, at least on Instagram, 40,000 people have liked it and might need some better understanding about why she might have said the things that she did. Because it really pains me how common the misunderstanding is about sex assault victims and how and why they report when they do, why they don't. Obviously, we all want to end any kind of exploitation and assault of men, women, and children around the world. People who care about that, but also having a fundamental misunderstanding about how those victims act and the powers and dynamics that play into what happens after that assault has occurred is something that we should all be better educated on. Because in Tim Ballard's attempt, a crappy one, but his attempt to maintain his good righteous image after being denounced by his Mormon church, in an attempt to maintain this image as the number one stopper of sex traffickers guy, he is able to smear all of these women who signed up to end the cause of sex trafficking, who are, a lot of them, honest, righteous, good Mormon women from Utah who are hairdressers and actresses and stay-at-home moms who he found attractive enough that he wanted to practice chemistry with, and said, God chose you and said, you're supposed to come on these missions with me. So in an attempt to maintain this image, Tim Ballard is now smearing these women in a reoccurring pattern, saying that they came on to me. They tried to seduce me. I said, no, no, no. He is cherry picking and taking certain excerpts of their text conversation where her attorneys have released the entire context of the text conversations, which tell a more coherent story for people who are willing to listen and people who want to empathize and understand why she was put in the position and groomed to be in that hotel room in the first place, and the role play that Tim Ballard set her up to participate in and then ended up sexually assaulting her. That you can see in full context of how this grooming and manipulation happened. From inviting her to a special screening of Sound of Freedom and her thinking that he is just, the most amazing guy ever, and feeling so humbled and honored that he would choose her to go into these dangerous places to save sex trafficked kids. And I believe her heart being in the right place, that she thought that that's what she was going to be able to do. So this is a super important point that I want to make, and I hope that you guys are paying attention, because I need to read for you what Tim Ballard, in his best defense for himself, that is just indicative of a wider pattern of what he's putting out there to his millions of followers and fans, and smearing Amy along with all these other women, but cherry picking out what she said to him after this alleged assault took place. But because that is not enough, I wanted to further illustrate this point and really drill this down. So I took to my Instagram today, and I had people write in, whether anonymously or not, stories if you've been a victim of sexual assault. And afterwards, you either made your abuser feel better, apologize to them, tried to say that it was okay, or tried to make sense of who this person is, that a good person like that has access to me even in this first place could not possibly do X, Y, and Z. And the real mindfuck that victims of sex assault have to go through that isn't immediate, that isn't as cut and dry as, get off of me, this is non-consensual. No, the grooming and the manipulation, spiritually, familial, a million different angles, really add to the complexity of this. And so I'm really thankful for the people who shared some of their stories. Reading these are really heavy, so again, a heavy trigger warning, but if I have a platform, this is something that I really want to make crystal clear. Tim Ballard, that this is not a good defense, and if 40,000 people on his Instagram think this is a good defense, the president of Anti-Sex Crimes Incorporated should absolutely know better of how people who experience sexual assault actually act. So Tim says on his Instagram, and all over the internet right now, basically a summary of his defamation lawsuit against Amy Morgan Davis. And it writes, In October 2021, former Miss Utah Amy Morgan Davis was kicked out of OUR undercover training school after having invited me to her hotel room to engage in sexual activity. Her actions were immediately reported to at least 4 OUR executives who documented the event and asked her to leave. Just spoiler alert, this is not what this video is about, but in the full context of the text messages that Amy has released, their conversations start to finish, everything that Tim says is actually opposite. Keep that in mind. Years later, she decided to join forces with co-plaintiffs, including a convicted child sex trafficker. Tim is referencing Kelly Suarez, who is an innocent woman that Tim just got sent to prison for 19 years. Pin in that, story for another time, but he's obviously trying to smear her by saying this, to accuse me of sexually assaulting her during the October 2021 training she was kicked out of. Unfortunately for her, she must have forgotten about the litany of texts she sent to me after having been kicked out of the training. Her own words condemn her. You be the judge, okay? Weeks after being removed from the training, she texted me the following, thus completely corroborating the true account of her attempted seduction of me. In fact, the texts themselves imply a continued effort on her part of seduction and most clearly disprove that I had assaulted her in any way. Weeks after she alleged that I assaulted her, she texted me the following, quote, I'm sad we can't train together. I felt really comfortable with you. Hopefully the decision wasn't because of me. I really respect and admire you and love our connection. Maybe we can talk in person. Dang, I definitely feel rejected. Our time together did mean something to me. I'm sad I can't see you. Maybe your eyes cast a spell on me. Baby blue. So while I'm saving Amy's full story and even the testimony of a witness of her good friend Emma that was there with her at the time during this training, and I have an interview with Emma coming out on my YouTube channel and my podcast Timmy Did What in the coming weeks, as well as a full breakdown of Amy's story, that's not what I want to concentrate on right now. So again, when women like Miss Utah, like Tim Ballard's other sex assault victims in this couple's ruse have come forward and have a line of evidence of his grooming that all include telling them that God chose you, that we are going to save so many kids, that this is what we do to save the kids. Does it not make sense in context, as evidence from other sex assault victims, that people try to make sense of assaults that happen to them because the ends will justify the means? How can I make sense of this person being a monster when everything I know about them is they're such a great person? If Tim Ballard, for instance, has come out repeatedly and said that these women that are now attacking him and smearing him and defaming him are stopping him from saving sex trafficked kids, that because of these lawsuits, because he has to spend so much money on lawyers, that they are now the stopgap between him saving these kids. That the inverse is also true, that when he is proposing that, that there are these kids who are in these horrible circumstances, sentenced to a life of rape and a hell that is unimaginable, and if only you can just do what needs to be done for the kids. If there's a gap and there's a chasm, and the way to bridge that gap is you snuffing down your rights, your autonomy, to act in this sexual manner with Tim Ballard, that if you can just do that, it will all be worth it. Like how this one person said that it is terrifying to be able to deconstruct and try to see this monster. Abusers and their allies want to very conveniently forget the context and the waters and culture in which people like Tim Ballard's victims swim in. Most of them are Mormon, and they are looking up to their apostles and their leadership, who are championing and supporting Tim Ballard, all the way up to Apostle M. Russell Ballard selling Tim Ballard's books in the church bookstore. That how are they supposed to make sense of what happened to them without feeling like, if this man is so angelic and participating in such heroic work, if I'm feeling uncomfortable with it, it's definitely not him, it's definitely a me problem. And to be able to deconstruct that this person is a monster is something that even my own co-host of my podcast, Ryan Fisher, who worked with Tim Ballard for many, many years, it took him 6 years after falling out with Tim Ballard to really look at it and say he was not who I thought that he was. Deconstructing who a person was is full of cognitive dissonance that makes our brains feel enormous amounts of pain, that we could be so wrong and that we could be so trusting, because it is not comfortable for our brain. Devastating. It's easier to say, I misunderstood I am the problem here, but this person should still continue the work. Therefore, and also that's why the women, they tried to handle this internally with Operation Underground Railroad for years, and they didn't want to make it public, but it's because that Tim Ballard's his own family members are on his board. They want to ride that gravy train. He has plenty of people who have intimidated other women from speaking out publicly. The last thing that they wanted to do, even while knowing that Tim Ballard sexually assaulted them, was to harm the cause of anti-sex trafficking by tearing down this type of figure, by exposing the truth about him. So people who are victims of sexual assault, it's really easy for their perpetrators to point to the things that they say afterwards, because that is just human psychology. Yes, this was me. Denial and fawning are very common defense mechanisms for obvious reasons. These men are dangerous, and it's instinctual to protect ourselves from seeing reality. And another person said, could be explained as a kind of fawning response. People fawn to ensure their own safety. Even if it seems contrary, responding in a negative way towards the behavior may endanger the person, so fawning is safer. Could also be dissociative. Completely agree. Another person wrote, yes, I comforted both my abusers. I blamed myself, their past traumas, anything but them. I wanted them to do better and get help that they so clearly needed. I now regret not holding them accountable, but it seemed right at the time. This one. I just kept dating him and it kept happening. I didn't know what to do. I was so worried my parents would be pissed, so I married him. 100%, especially as a very sexually naive and inexperienced Mormon teen, I had no concept of what was happening, but he was a respected priesthood holder and had a vision in which Heavenly Father told him sacred spiritual activity was meant to be and would prove our commitment to God's plan. It's giving Tim Ballard. Yes, spent weeks reassuring my ex he wasn't a bad person for assaulting me before finally breaking up. Also continued to reach out to him after the breakup. It's a well-known pattern of abuse victims. I believe I willfully submitted to being assaulted because I was poor and from the sticks, and his dad was the county prosecutor. And of course, the son of a prosecutor wouldn't do anything wrong. And speaking for myself, nothing has effed up my life more than the majority of it that has been spent outsourcing my autonomy and intuition to people and institutions that I believed knew better than me, that I could not fathom would do anything to hurt me. I hope that by making this video, whether or not you care about Tim Ballard and these sex assault allegations, whether you believe me, the women, anything to do with Tim Ballard, or care to listen to another thing about him ever again, I hope that if the unfortunate day ever arises where somebody that you love comes to you and expresses that they have been sexually assaulted in any way, shape, or form, that you can take into context everything that I shared today and offer non-judgmental support and empathy so that any victim of sexual assault can get the healing that they deserve.